The Sarasota Manatee MPO, for just like a lot of MPOs, I kind of taken a look at bike pedestrian type facilities as a standalone process and had our own bicycle pedestrian plan dating back to 2013. And this was up in 2019. So we hadn't really updated any of our plans for quite some time. So we wanted to look at a broader scope when we were developing a new plan. And this is how we kind of landed on the active transportation plan concept. And this took it beyond just pedestrian and bicycle facilities, but also kind of tying in transit. And this is kind of how we utilized StreetLight Data and some of the other big data sources we found to kind of create a network and a vision for the future of a car-free, if you will, network in our region. So briefly, I'm going to go over a brief introduction, talk about some of the analysis we did, then the recommendations that were made in our active transportation plan, and then as well as some of the next steps that we're now working on today. The scope that we looked at with our active transportation plan, we kind of wanted to take a look at all of the data that we had gathered over the past 6 or 7 years that needed to be built in to a new plan. We wanted to look at some of the best practices and strategies from around the country and some of the new facility standards and tie those in as well. A lot of what MPOs do now are also based around performance measures and goals. So we wanted to make sure what we were doing would allow us to build upon these and report accurately to our reviewing agencies and make sure that we were on track. The major concept really is identifying some of the deficiencies that we had on a corridor by corridor level so that we could help address them with project implementation going forward, and then created ongoing performance monitoring as well as some funding strategies based on the funding sources that we have available at the MPO, local, and state level. The vision we created that was kind of done with our technical advisory committee as well as our board was to improve walking, biking, and transit networks and encourage connections between modes so that citizens and visitors can travel safely and conveniently using these modes to get to their destinations. The emphasis is really on the destinations and moving people around our region, as we are large, just like most of Florida, tourist hub. We wanted to make sure that when we're creating these things, we're not just building facilities for the sake of building them. We want to make sure that they're connecting locations that are frequented by both tourists as well as our citizens and local patrons. So we had 4 main goals, basically what's highlighted there in blue: safety, equity, connected, safe, and accessible, comfortable network, as well as increasing the number of transit, walking, and biking trips in the region, which would also, in fact, help with some of our reliability and congestion measures as well. So the methodology, we really wanted to look at defining some activity centers. This was run through many of our committees on several occasions, creating some existing facilities and existing centers that we could all agree upon. We then moved to improving the connection between these centers and then circulation within these centers, and then identifying the best facilities that could be implemented at each of these given activity centers. So based on that, we identified them based on population and employment density, some key destinations, the beaches, things like that, the airport, any other major facility that we have in the area. And then we also looked at some of the areas that were not so great, our bike ped crash areas, as well as areas that are low income, have 0-car households that would benefit the most from improvements in bicycle, pedestrian, and transit facilities. So really it got down to defining how we would create these routes. So we looked at how we would move people between these centers. There's always the shortest path, which is, looking at every road and every existing trail and really just connecting them. The existing bikeable path, we kind of used several main contributing factors to this: local roads with less than 30-mile-an-hour speed limits, arterials with less than 25, 30 if it had a bike lane, as well as existing proposed trails. In doing this, we kind of did the best we could in creating a recommended route, combining these with safety as well as the shortest distance. So we kind of looked at creating low stress networks as the concept that's been around quite some time. Most of our bikers, like anywhere else, their bike riders are interested, but they're concerned about the facilities. Most would feel more comfortable on separated facilities rather than standard on-road bike facilities with high speeds. So just an example of this, connecting our airport to our downtown area, the fastest route would of course be taking, all the main roads down to downtown. However, that's not always the safest option. So the blue route in the end, the thin blue route, was the route that we actually selected. Basically taking some of the road that had existing bike facilities, but then moving over to some of the more local limit residential streets to create a safer option, but is also as direct as possible. So with that, we created our vision network for the entire region. Some were short-term, some are long-term. The red is the SunTrail state adopted network. We're one of the few areas in Florida that has a large loop that connects a lot of our eastern facilities to our beaches as well. We're going to be doing some corridor studies on those light red conceptual SunTrail segments here in the near future to help create defined routes in those areas. And, the thought is to create some major long-term, north, south, east, west corridors that would have the facilities necessary to move people from activity center to activity center. With this, along using this vision network, we also identified the gaps in high stress facilities and missing facilities, and then they were scored and placed into our project prioritization criteria, and were then added to our long-range transportation plan update for implementation and funding. So this was an example of directly taking some of the information that was pulled from this assessment and this plan and moving it directly into implementation and project funding. Where StreetLight was really used in our project was within the transit aspect. The transit aspect has always been difficult. We're a 2-county region, some low-level ridership, connecting between many large areas. We do have a good Route 99, that connects our downtowns between Bradenton and Sarasota, that's used effectively. However, StreetLight allowed us to look at some of these local pairs and things that we could really use, where we would really benefit from circulators or removing routes or adding additional capacity on routes. And it really provided that. So on the left, it kind of created some large scale trends. And then on the right, it created some of the more circulating type trends that where we would benefit from shorter routes where there's a lot of consistent trips in those areas. So we really benefited from this origin destination data in this fact. And we really looked at 8 different time periods, 3 peak months and off peak months. Our level of traffic really varies from time to time, whether during season or off season. We looked at weekdays and weekends, as well as AM peak hours and PM peak hours, as well as midday, to kind of give us a good variance on when these things would be adjusted. We analyzed trip patterns for all income levels and for income less than the county median. So areas that would really benefit from transit, improved transit services, and improved transit frequency. So just a quick example, south of Sarasota and south the Sarasota County, right near the Charlotte border, Northport, we looked at the route that was currently in place and realized that based on the data that the majority of the trips were internal, so they could potentially benefit from a more circular type bus route rather than, we have a long interstate route that comes down from Sarasota along I-75, where we probably weren't getting the highest level of benefit out of running that route at the cost per trip. Whereas, the higher number of trips actually coming from Sarasota County are going back and forth to Charlotte. So this is an example of how we could use this data to improve our network and to effectively use resources. With that being said, we kind of, out of this plan, we generated a new weighting score for our active transportation plan. This allowed to some of these smaller projects, bike ped transit projects, to score favorably with our large scale intersection improvement capacity type projects. So with that, we moved forward and adopted our long-range transportation plan in October 26, 2020. And this included a lot of the transportation alternatives box fund projects that were identified using this plan. Over the next 25 years, $25 million has been set aside to implement federal money, of our MPO money, to implement some of these projects and gaps that were found during the active transportation plan analysis. And with that, I'll go ahead and wrap up and pass it back to Lane.